You want me gone, say it to my face. Elena Brooks set the kitchen knife flat on the table between them, blade pointing at no one. Don't send a man with a gun to do it. Wade Harper hadn't moved from the doorway. Outside, Aldous Crane's rider was still visible at the gate, waiting, watching, patient, the way a debt collector is patient. Wade looked at the woman who had walked into his dying ranch 3 weeks ago with nothing but a canvas bag and a locked box, and had somehow become the one thing standing between him and losing everything. "Nobody's sending you anywhere," he said. "Not while I'm breathing. If this story already has you, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel, follow every part to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." The ad had been simple. 3 lines in the Millhaven Gazette buried between a notice about a missing plow horse and a church social announcement. Cook needed. Harper Ridge Ranch, room and board, inquire at the property. Wade hadn't expected anyone to answer it. He'd placed it mostly because his foreman Cal Dutton had told him the men were close to walking out, not over the wages, which were already 2 weeks behind, but over the food. Or the lack of it. "A man can work through cold and debt," Cal had said, standing in the doorway of the barn with his hat in his hands like he was delivering news at a funeral. "But a man can't work through hunger. They're eating hardtack and whatever Remy throws together over the fire, and Remy's cooking is punishment enough without adding everything else." Wade hadn't argued. He'd written the ad that afternoon. He hadn't expected Elena Brooks. She arrived on a Tuesday right at the midpoint of the worst dust storm the territory had seen in 3 years. The men were sheltering in the bunkhouse. Wade was in the main house going over ledger numbers that refused to make sense no matter how many times he ran them when he heard the front door open. He didn't reach for the shotgun propped against the wall. He didn't call out a warning. He just went still, the particular stillness of a man who had learned that reacting too fast in a dangerous situation cost more than it bought. Then he heard footsteps, measured, unhurried, moving through the front room toward the kitchen. He followed. She was already at the pantry when he got there, a woman medium height, dark hair pinned back with 2 plain clips, wearing a canvas coat that had seen better years and carrying a bag that looked like it contained everything she owned. She had her back to him and was cataloging the shelves with a quick, practiced efficiency that told him she'd done this kind of inventory before. Many times. She didn't startle when he stepped into the kitchen. She didn't turn around. "Your flour's got weevils," she said. "Your cornmeal's passable. The salt pork is old but usable if I trim it. You've got a decent supply of dried beans, no lard, and whoever's been running this kitchen left without cleaning the stove properly. There's grease caked on the back burner that's a fire risk." Wade stared at her. "Who are you?" She turned then. Her eyes were dark, not hard exactly, but careful. The kind of careful that comes from having learned at some cost to assess before trusting. "Elena Brooks. I'm here about the cook position." "The storm. I rode through it." She said it the way someone might say, "I walked across the room." No drama, no expectation of credit. "I'd like to see the rest of the supplies before I commit to anything if you don't mind. A kitchen can tell you a lot about a ranch." Wade crossed his arms. In 10 years of running Harper Ridge, no one had ever walked into his house uninvited and started cataloging his pantry. He wasn't sure whether to be irritated or impressed. He settled on something in between. "And what is this kitchen telling you?" She looked at him for a moment, measuring quiet. "That whoever was running things here cared about the work once, and then stopped caring, or got too tired to keep going." She paused. Which one was it? It hit him somewhere in the chest, that question. Not because it was offensive, because it was accurate. "Both," he said. She nodded once, like that was an acceptable answer. Then she turned back to the shelves. "I'll need a supply run before I can put a proper meal together, but I can work with what's here tonight if you tell me how many men I'm feeding." 7 counting me. "Any dietary restrictions I should know about?" "One man doesn't eat pork. Religious reasons." "Noted." She was already pulling things off shelves, setting them on the work table in a deliberate arrangement. "I'll need to know the ranch schedule so I know when meals need to be ready. I don't do guesswork." 5:30 in the morning, noon if the men come in, 6 in the evening. Agreed. She finally set her bag down on the chair beside the door, not dropping it, setting it with a care that made him think it contained something fragile or valuable, despite looking like nothing from the outside. Do you need references? Do you have them? A beat. I have experience, she said. More than most places would require. That wasn't an answer. He filed it away. The pay is modest, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. Room and board included. Small room off the back of the kitchen. It's clean. Then we have an agreement. She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd turned around, and there was something in that look, not a challenge, not warmth exactly, but a kind of level steadiness that he couldn't quite categorize. I'd like to start tonight if that's acceptable. Wade Harper had been running this ranch alone for 2 years since his father died. He'd hired hands fired, hands borrowed money, lost cattle, and fought the bank with nothing but his own stubbornness to keep him standing. He was not a man who made decisions lightly. He looked at Elena Brooks for 3 full seconds. The stove's yours, he said. Mottleweg. Cal Dutton nearly dropped his coffee mug when he walked into the main house at 6:15 that evening and found 7 men seated around a table that had been bare for the better part of 4 months. There was a pot of thick beef and bean stew at the center cornbread still steaming from the oven, and a small jar of something dark and sweet that turned out to be a molasses-based preserves she'd found sealed in the back of the pantry and apparently deemed acceptable for use. Cal looked at the table. He looked at the woman moving quietly between the stove and the sideboard. He looked at Wade, who was seated at the head of the table with an expression Cal couldn't read. Well, Cal said, pulling out his chair. I'll be. The men ate like they hadn't eaten in weeks because most of them hadn't not properly. Remy Alcott, the youngest hand, a 19-year-old from out of Lubbock, who had never been more than 20 miles from a town before signing on at Harper Ridge, had seconds, and then looked up at Elena with an expression somewhere between reverence and embarrassment. Ma'am, this is about the best stew I've had since my grandmother's table. Elena was wiping down the stovetop. She didn't turn around. Then your grandmother was a good cook. Remy blinked. Yes, ma'am. She was. A short pause settled over the table, not uncomfortable. Just a pause. And then Marcus Webb, the ranch's most senior hand, a quiet man of 50-something who rarely said more than what a situation required, reached for the bread and said without ceremony, Same time tomorrow. 5:30 for breakfast, Elena said. I don't hold it for late arrivals. Marcus nodded. That was that. Wade watched all of it from his end of the table without saying much. He watched the way the men straightened up slightly in their seats. The way the conversation came back, not loud or forced. Just there, the natural low hum of people sharing a meal who'd forgotten for a while that meals were supposed to be shared. He watched Elena move through the kitchen with that same unhurried efficiency she'd brought to the pantry inventory, and he noticed things he hadn't expected to notice. She kept her back to the room as much as possible, not shyly, but deliberately, as though maintaining a professional distance she'd established on purpose. She refilled the bread basket once, and then stood by the stove with her arms at her sides, not hovering, not waiting for compliments, just present. She'd eaten earlier, he realized, alone quickly before the men came in, and she never set her bag down anywhere except within arm's reach. The first morning was what settled it for the crew. 5:25, 2 minutes before the bunkhouse bell. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee and something that might have been biscuits drifted across the yard with an authority that no alarm clock in the world could have matched. The men were out of their bunks before the bell rang. Cal found this so remarkable, he mentioned it to Wade while they were saddling up. Didn't have to call anyone this morning, Cal said. They were all up and moving before I opened my mouth. Remy had his boots on the right feet and everything. Wade almost smiled. Almost. Don't get comfortable, he said more to himself than to Cal. Nothing about this situation is settled yet. Cal glanced at him. The bank. The bank. The Prentice pasture fence that needs $300 of repair we don't have. The water situation on the east side. He tightened the cinch on his saddle. Elena Brooks can cook, I'll give her that. But a good meal doesn't fix a failing ranch. No, Cal agreed. But it keeps the men here long enough to try. He wasn't wrong about that. It wasn't something Wade could dismiss, even if part of him wanted to. 3 men had left in the past 4 months, not because they hated Harper Ridge, but because staying felt futile, and futility has a way of wearing a person down, until one morning they just don't get up. Having something good at the table, something as simple and fundamental as a real meal, hot and well made, and put in front of them with regularity, it was a signal. An argument made without words that someone still cared about the place, that it was still worth showing up for. He rode out that morning with more of a sense of purpose than he'd felt in months, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. 4 days into her time at Harper Ridge, Elena Brooks rearranged the kitchen. She did it on a Wednesday afternoon when the men were out and Wade was doing the fence survey on the north pasture. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce it. She simply moved things, the dry goods, to a more accessible shelf. The cooking tools reorganized by use frequency. The firewood stacked beside the stove instead of across the room. 3 cast iron pans she found under a bench in the back room, cleaned and re-seasoned, and hung on proper hooks. When Wade came in at 6, the kitchen looked like a different room. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Elena was at the stove. She said without turning, "The previous arrangement wasn't efficient. I work faster this way. If something's in the wrong place for you, tell me and I'll adjust it." "It's your kitchen," Wade said. "It's your ranch. While you're cooking, it's your kitchen." He hung his hat on the hook by the door and went to the sink to wash. "The cast iron work out. They're good pans. Someone let them rust, which is a shame. They'll hold up fine now." "My mother's," he said. He hadn't meant to say it. The words came out without his deciding to offer them. A pause. The sound of a spoon against the pot. "They're good quality," Elena said. Not "I'm sorry." Not "oh, that must be hard." Just an acknowledgement that they were worth something. He found unexpectedly that he preferred that. He sat down at the table and started going through the day's notes from the fence survey. She cooked. The kitchen was quiet except for the stove and the occasional sound from outside. It was, he realized about 20 minutes later, the first genuinely comfortable silence he'd been in for longer than he could remember. He didn't like that he noticed it. The crew noticed things too, of course. Men who live and work in close quarters always do. It's survival, that habit of reading the room. Tracking changes in people's behavior and energy, the way you track changes in weather. And they read Elena Brooks, the way they read everything quietly, practically drawing conclusions and keeping them mostly to themselves. Marcus Webb told Cal, while they were mending the east fence, that the new cook reminded him of someone he'd known in the war, a field medic who'd done more with less than anyone had a right to, and who'd kept her head when everything around her was coming apart. "What happened to her?" Cal asked. "She went home," Marcus said. "Started over." He drove a nail with one solid stroke. Smart woman. Cal processed this. He'd been watching Elena Brooks the same way he watched everything at Harper Ridge, through the lens of what it meant for Wade. Cal Dutton had worked for the Harper family for 11 years. He'd watched Wade's father build this place into something real and then watch it erode as his health failed. He'd watched Wade take over at 22 green and grieving and running on stubbornness and hold on through years that would have broken most men twice his age. Cal knew Wade Harper the way you know land. You've worked every dip and swell, every place where the surface looks solid but gives beneath you if you step wrong. And what he knew was this Wade Harper was a man who had stopped believing that good things could hold. Every improvement got managed down in his head to a liability. Every person who came to Harper Ridge was assessed primarily for the cost of their eventual departure. He wasn't cold. You couldn't spend 5 minutes with the man and call him cold. But he'd built walls, and he'd built them so gradually that he probably didn't fully know they were there anymore. Elena Brooks, without appearing to do anything at all, was making those walls visible. And Cal figured that was either going to be very good or very complicated. Probably both. On the 6th day, Wade found Elena in the barn at 5 in the morning. He'd gotten up early, as he often did when the ledger numbers were bad enough to chase sleep away, and walked out to check on a mare that had been off her feed. He heard the low, even sound of someone talking before he opened the barn door, a voice quiet and unhurried, the kind of voice you use when you're not expecting an audience. He pushed the door open softly. Elena was standing beside the mare's stall, not inside it, but at the gate, one hand resting on the wood. She was talking to the horse the way he'd seen experienced hands do, not baby talk, not commands, just a steady conversational murmur that communicated calm through tone more than meaning. The mare, who had been restless enough that Remy had mentioned it twice, was standing with her head low and her ears soft. Elena didn't hear him come in. Or if she did, she gave no sign of it. He stood there for a moment, just long enough to register something he hadn't expected, which was that this woman who moved through the ranch house with the careful, contained energy of someone who had made a practice of taking up as little space as possible was completely different here. Looser, less guarded. She was still precise, still quiet, but the vigilance was gone, and what was underneath it was something warmer and considerably sadder than he'd anticipated. He cleared his throat. She turned, and for just half a second less than that, there it was. The guard going back up, quick and practiced like pulling on a coat. Then she was simply Elena Brooks again, unreadable and composed. "Mare was restless," she said. "I know. I came to check on her." He moved to the stall. The horse turned her head and regarded him with one liquid dark eye. "She eaten?" "Not much. I brought out some of the dried apple from the pantry, a little." He looked at her. "You've worked with horses." "Some." "Where?" A pause that lasted exactly one beat too long. "Different places," she said. He let it sit there. He'd learned over the past week that pressing Elena Brooks for information was like pressing on a wall. She didn't get agitated or defensive. She simply didn't move. The information that came from her came on her own schedule, offered when she chose to offer it, and not before. "She'll be all right," he said finally about the mare. "I think so. She just needed company." A beat. Then something that wasn't quite an admission but carried the weight of one. "Some creatures do." He looked at her. She was already turning back toward the house. "Breakfast in 40 minutes, she said. And then she was gone. Wade stood in the barn, with his hand on the gate of the mare's stall, and the faint smell of dried apple in the air, and thought about walls, the ones he'd built, and the ones he could see in someone else. The letter from the bank arrived on a Thursday. Not the first letter. He'd had plenty of those, each one a little more official and a little less flexible than the last. But this one was different. This one had a date on it, and the date was 6 weeks away, and the language was the kind that told you the conversation was over, and what came next was consequences. He read it at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning after the men had gone out for the day. Elena was cleaning up from breakfast. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She'd probably seen him go pale before he'd realized he'd done it. She set a second cup of coffee beside him without comment and went back to the dishes. He stared at the letter. 6 weeks. He'd need close to $4,000. He didn't have to cover what was owed before the foreclosure date. He had the cattle, what was left of them, but the spring market price had been weak, and he'd have to take a loss to move them fast enough to matter. He could sell the east pasture maybe. But selling land to save the ranch felt like burning the house to stay warm. "Is it bad?" Elena asked, quietly, still at the sink. He considered not answering. Then, "The bank wants to foreclose." She was still for a moment, just for a moment. Then the sound of the water resumed. "How long do you have?" 6 weeks. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind from earlier in the week. This one had weight in it. "Is there a way to make it work?" she asked. "There might be. If I move the cattle fast and get a fair price, if the Hendersons will extend the equipment credit again, if nothing else breaks down in the next 40 days. He set the letter face down on the table. "That's a lot of ifs." She dried her hands on the dish towel and turned around. She looked at him with that level, careful gaze, the one he still couldn't entirely read. "Tell me about the cattle." "What?" "Tell me about the cattle situation. What you have, what you need, what you're working with. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. I've been running supply and provisions long enough to know that sometimes a second set of eyes on a problem is useful. I'm not a rancher, but I can listen. He stared at her for a moment. He'd had hands foreman his father people who were part of the operation who knew the numbers out of necessity. But he hadn't had anyone simply offer to listen in a long time. The offer felt strange, not unwelcome. He started talking, and Elena Brooks listened, not with the nodding performative attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with a focused, genuine quiet that made him feel like what he was saying mattered. She asked 2 questions in the whole conversation. Both of them were exactly the right questions. By the time he finished, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. Not because anything had changed, the numbers were still what they were, and the bank was still coming. But the weight of carrying it alone had eased slightly, and he was honest enough with himself to notice the difference. "Thank you," he said. She looked mildly surprised by the words, like she wasn't accustomed to them. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You listened." She held his gaze for a moment. Something shifted in those careful eyes, not enough to name, just enough to see. Then she stood, picked up her dish towel, and went back to the stove. "Noon meal at 12, she said. "Same as always." He picked up the letter, folded it, put it in his shirt pocket, and told himself that 6 weeks was enough time to turn things around. He almost believed it. On the 9th day, a rider came in from the Western Trail at dusk. Wade saw him from the porch, a big man on a gray horse, riding with the particular easy arrogance of someone who had never been in a hurry, because the world had always waited for him. He rode into the yard and stopped and looked at the house with an expression that told you he was calculating something, measuring something, deciding something, and that he was accustomed to his decisions going one way. Wade stepped off the porch. "You're on Harper Ridge land," he said. "What's your business?" The man smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that gets shown when the person smiling knows something you don't. "My name's Aldous Crane," the man said. "I'm looking for a woman. Goes by Elena Brooks." Something went cold and tight in Wade's chest. Not fear exactly, but the particular alertness of a man who has heard a tone of voice before and knows what it means. "No one here by that name?" he said. Crane tilted his head, still smiling. "Is that right?" It wasn't a question. "Well, I'll tell you what, if she does happen to come through, you tell her that Aldous Crane sends his regards. And tell her that what belongs to him always finds its way back. Always." He held Wade's gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough to make a point short enough to seem unconcerned, and then he turned his horse and rode back out the way he came. Wade stood in the yard and watched until the horse cleared the tree line. Then he turned and went into the house. Elena was at the stove. She hadn't come to the window. She hadn't looked out. But there was something in the set of her shoulders, the angle of them, the slight rigidity, that told him she had heard every word. He walked into the kitchen and stood at the table. "Elena!" She kept her eyes on the stove. "Elena, look at me." She set down the spoon. She turned around. Her face was composed the way a face is composed when composure is a thing you've practiced until it becomes second nature. But her hands were gripping the edge of the counter behind her. "Whatever he told you," she started. "He didn't tell me anything," Wade said. "He said your name, and I told him no one here had it." He held her gaze. "But I need to know what I'm dealing with." She was quiet for a very long moment. Long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer at all. Then she said, "Aldous Crane is from St. Louis. He's connected to people who don't take no for an answer and don't tolerate loose ends." Her voice was flat and careful, each word chosen with precision. "I worked for someone who owed him money. When that person couldn't pay, Crane decided the debt transferred. To me. To whatever I had or could provide." A pause. "I left. He didn't agree with that decision." Wade processed this. "Is he the kind of man to come back?" "Yes." "With company?" "Usually." The kitchen was very quiet. From outside came the low sound of the evening wind and the distant voice of one of the hands calling the horses in. "How much trouble?" Wade asked. Elena looked at him steadily. "More than a ranch cook is worth to you," she said. "I'll understand if you want me to go." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair, sat down, and said, "Sit." She blinked. "Wade, sit down, Elena." Not harsh. Level. "Nobody leaves Harper Ridge because a man rode in and made vague threats at sundown. That's not how this works." He folded his hands on the table. "Now, tell me everything I need to know." Elena Brooks stood at the counter for 3 full seconds, and something in those careful, guarded eyes cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. She pulled out a chair, and she sat down. She didn't start with St. Louis. She started before it with a town called Garvey Falls, 2 years back, where she'd been cooking at a boarding house that was respectable enough on the outside, and considerably less so in the rooms upstairs. She hadn't known that when she took the job. By the time she did, she was already in deep enough that leaving wasn't simple. "The owner's name was Prentice," she said. "Franklin Prentice." Wade went still. "Harvey Prentice's brother, the rancher over in Delaney County. His cousin, but yes." She folded her hands on the table. Not nervously steadily, the way you hold your hands when you're making yourself get through something. Prentice owed money to Aldous Crane, a significant amount. He'd borrowed to expand the boarding house, spent half of it on things that weren't the boarding house, and then the business went bad, and he had nothing to repay with. She paused. "Crane has a way of handling debts that other people can't cover. He takes something else instead, and you were something else." "I kept the books," she said. "I'd been doing it for 6 months because Prentice couldn't add a column without making 3 errors. I knew where every dollar went. I knew which accounts were real and which ones Prentice had constructed to look real." She met his gaze directly. "Crane wanted that information. He came to Prentice and said if he couldn't pay the money, he'd take the books and whatever I knew along with them. Permanently." The word landed the way she meant it to. "You ran," Wade said. "Prentice warned me. That was the only decent thing he ever did. He sent me a note the night before Crane's men were supposed to come for me. I had 4 hours." She exhaled slowly. "I took what I could carry and I left." "And Crane's been following you since. Intermittently. He's not the kind of man who chases. He's the kind of man who sends someone ahead to every town you might pass through and waits." She looked at the table for a moment. "He came here himself. That means he has reason to believe I'm settled, that I'm not running anymore." Wade absorbed this. The fire in the stove settled and popped. From somewhere outside, a horse stamped. "How much does he know about this ranch?" "Enough to find it. I don't know what else." "Has he ever used violence beyond threats?" Her jaw tightened barely perceptibly. "Yes. Against you. Against people connected to me." A short silence. "There was a man in Garvey Falls. He worked the stable at the boarding house. He tried to tell Crane's men that he didn't know where I'd gone even though he did. They believed him eventually." She said it without inflection. It took them a while to believe him. Wade sat with that for a moment. He wasn't a man who indulged in anger as a performance. He'd always thought that kind of anger was mostly for people who wanted to be seen feeling things. But what moved through him in that moment was cold and concrete and had a very clear direction. "You should have told me this when you arrived," he said. "Yes," she said. "I should have." She didn't make excuses, didn't soften it. "I needed the position, and She stopped, started again. "I'm not accustomed to people choosing to keep me around once they know." The room was quiet. Wade looked at her for a long moment, at the careful posture, the held-together quality of her, the way she sat at his kitchen table like she was already preparing herself to be asked to leave. "Go to bed," he said. She blinked. "Wade, you've got breakfast at 5:30 and I've got thinking to do. Go to bed, Elena." He stood up and moved to the stove, refilling his coffee from the pot she'd left warming. "You're not going anywhere tonight." She stood slowly. picked up her bag, which he now noticed contained a change of clothes, a small locked box, and almost certainly those ledger records she'd mentioned without mentioning them, because Elena Brooks was the kind of woman who kept what mattered close and moved fast when she had to. She was almost to the kitchen door when she stopped. "Why?" she asked, not argumentatively, genuinely, like the answer was something she needed to understand and couldn't figure out on her own. He didn't turn around. "Because Aldous Crane came onto my land and made threats," he said, "and I have enough problems without adding the problem of letting that stand." He picked up his cup. "Now get some sleep." A pause, just long enough for him to hear her exhale one quiet, controlled breath. Then the sound of her footsteps moving down the hall toward the back room, and the soft, careful sound of the door closing behind her. Wade stood at the stove a long time after that. "Taptakik," he told Cal the next morning, before the crew came in for breakfast. Out in the barn, voices low, the kind of conversation men have when they want it to stay between them for now. Cal listened without interrupting. When Wade finished, he turned his hat over twice in his hands, a habit Wade had observed for 11 years, as a reliable indicator of how serious Cal thought something was. "You know who Aldous Crane is?" Cal asked. "I know of him. You." "I knew a lawman out of Caperton who spent 2 years trying to build a case against him. Crane operates across 3 territories. Money, property, influence. Buys the people he can't frighten and frightens the ones he can't buy." Cal put his hat back on. "He's not just dangerous, Wade. He's connected. He's got law in his pocket in at least 2 counties, and a judge over in Millhaven that people have been talking about for years." Wade felt the scope of it settle on him like weather. "And he came here himself. Which means he's done with being patient." Cal looked at him steadily. "What are you planning to do?" "Keep the crew together. Keep Elena here. Tighten up at night. I want someone on watch from sundown to sunup until I know what Crane's next move is." He met Cal's gaze. "And I'm going to write to the federal marshal's office in Caperton. If this man has a history, there's a record of it somewhere. That could take weeks. Then we'd better get started." Cal nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Wade, the men will hold. They're already different than they were 2 weeks ago. You can feel it. But they need to know what they're signing on for." "I know. You going to tell them?" "Tonight. All of them together." He picked up his saddle. "They can decide for themselves what they want to do. I won't hold any man here against his judgment." Cal watched him for a moment with the expression he reserved for occasions when he thought Wade was doing something right but wasn't going to say so directly. Then he turned to his own horse. 5:30 breakfast, Cal said mildly. "She really does keep to the time, doesn't she?" "Every meal," Wade said. "On the minute." "Good," Cal said. "A woman like that is worth the trouble." It wasn't a small thing to say. Coming from Cal Dutton, who measured everything by what it cost and what it held, it was as close to a recommendation as Wade had heard in years. Elena made biscuits that morning with a gravy that Marcus Webb described with maximum understatement as not bad at all. She noticed the slight shift in the room, the way the men's glances carried a little more weight, the way Cal's politeness had a different quality to it, and said nothing. She refilled coffee, managed the stove, and moved through the kitchen with her usual economy of motion. But she was watching. He knew that now, not with suspicion, but with the particular attentiveness of a person who had learned that changes in atmosphere precede events and that being caught unprepared was a cost she wasn't willing to pay again. She was watching him specifically. Not constantly, not obviously, just checking. The way you check a sky that's been clear all morning when you know the weather can turn. He didn't address it directly. He just midway through the morning found a reason to walk back through the kitchen, and as he passed he said quietly without stopping, "Meeting tonight after supper. I'm telling the crew. You should be there." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The slight stilling of her hands at the wash basin told him she'd heard. The afternoon brought its own trouble separate from Crane and separate from the bank. The kind of trouble that Harper Ridge had been generating reliably for the past 8 months. The water flow from the eastern channel had been dropping for 3 weeks, and that afternoon, Marcus rode in from the east pasture with news that it had effectively stopped. "Blockage?" Wade asked. "Maybe, or someone moved a gate upstream." Marcus's voice was level, but his eyes weren't. "Garrett Slocum's land is upstream." "Slocum." Wade exhaled through his nose. Garrett Slocum was a man who had been trying to buy or pressure Harper Ridge out of existence for 4 years, first through lowball purchase offers, then through a legal dispute over an easement that had taken 18 months and more money than Wade had to spend to resolve, and now apparently through whatever other methods occurred to him. He owned the water rights to the upper channel through an arrangement that had seemed equitable when Wade's father signed it, and had looked worse every year since. "I'll ride out tomorrow," Wade said. "You want company?" "No." He thought about it. "Yes, take Remy." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Remy Alcott was 19 years old and enthusiastic, which were both useful qualities and also the sort that required management in situations involving Garrett Slocum. "I'll keep him from doing anything dramatic," Marcus said. "I'd appreciate that." He didn't mention the water issue to Elena. She had enough to carry. But when he came in for the noon meal and sat at the table, she set the plate in front of him and then, without being asked, sat across from him with her own cup of coffee and said, "What happened?" He looked at her. "Your jaw does a thing when the ranch is adding a new problem," she said, not unkindly, just factually. "What is it?" He told her about Slocum and the water. She listened. Then she said, "Is Slocum connected to the bank pressure?" He paused. He had not thought about that, not directly, not as a connected piece. He sat with it for a moment and felt the uncomfortable rearrangement of a picture that had just grown larger and more deliberate than he'd been treating it. "I don't know," he said. "It might be worth finding out." He looked at her. She was watching him with that steady, careful gaze, and there was something in it now, something that hadn't been there the first day or even the 4th day. A different quality of attention. Like she was invested in how this turned out. Like Harper Ridge had become something she had a stake in, even if she hadn't decided yet how to feel about that. "You're useful," he said. Not as a compliment exactly. As a statement of fact. She looked slightly startled. Then the corner of her mouth moved, not a smile exactly, something adjacent to one. "The stew's going to scorch if you don't eat," she said. He ate. The crew meeting that evening was the hardest thing he'd done in a while, and he'd had a difficult 2 years. 7 men around the big table, the supper plates cleared, the lamp turned up. Elena stood near the stove with her arms folded and her back straight, and said nothing, but her presence in the room was part of what he'd meant by having her there, and he thought the men understood that. He laid it out plain. Elena's history. Aldous Crane. What Crane was, and what he was capable of. He did not minimize it, and he did not dress it up. He told them about the stableman in Garvey Falls, and he watched their faces as he said it and did not look away. When he finished, the room was quiet. Remy Alcott spoke first, which surprised no one who knew Remy. "So he's coming back." "Most likely. With men." "Probably." Remy nodded with the particular solemnity of a 19-year-old who has decided he is the kind of person who handles things. "All right." That was it. That was all he said. And then he looked at the table and didn't say anything else, which was for Remy remarkable restraint. Marcus Webb spoke next. "What's the watch schedule?" "2 men a night rotating. I'll take the first." "You won't," Marcus said with a finality that left no room for argument. "You need to be sharp for whatever Slocum pulls tomorrow and whatever Crane sends the day after. You sleep. Cal and I take first watch. We'll work out the rotation in the morning." Cal nodded. The other men 3 hands who'd been at Harper Ridge between 1 and 3 years looked at each other, and then at Wade with expressions that said without needing words that they were in. Wade looked around the table. At these men who hadn't left when the pay was late, and the food was bad and the future of the ranch was questionable. Who had stayed because he was only just now allowing himself to fully understand this, they believed in the place. and maybe in him. Something tightened in his chest. He kept his voice level. Anyone who wants to ride out, I won't hold it against you. I mean that. Silence. Then we're done, he said. Get some rest. The men got up, and there was a shift in the room as they moved toward the door, a different quality of energy than there'd been before the meeting. More deliberate, more settled. Like men who had chosen something and were comfortable with what they'd chosen. Remy stopped near the stove on his way out. He looked at Elena with a directness that was more earnest than bold. Ma'am, he said, nobody's going to let that man get to you. I want you to know that. Elena looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her face, quick and complicated, and then gone. Thank you, Remy, she said. He nodded twice with great seriousness and went out. The kitchen emptied. Wade was the last one in it, and Elena was still by the stove, her arms still folded, looking at the door the men had just walked through. You didn't tell them to say that, she said. No. You didn't ask them to stay? No. She was quiet for a long moment. Why do they? Because this is their home, Wade said simply. People will do a lot for a place that feels like home. She turned her head and looked at him. Something in her eyes, not the crack from the night before. Something quieter than that, like a window opening an inch instead of breaking. She dropped her gaze before he could figure out what it meant. I'll have breakfast ready at 5:30, she said. I know you will. He walked to the door and then stopped, turned. Elena, the locked box in your bag, is that the ledger? She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. Yes. That's the evidence that ties Crane to Prentice's operation. Among other things, names, amounts, dates, enough to make a case if the right person looked at it. She met his eyes, enough to make Crane very motivated to ensure the right person never gets a chance to. He thought about what Cal had said about the marshal in Caperton, about the judge in Millhaven who'd been bought, about 6 weeks until the bank moved on the ranch, and Slocum upstream pulling off the water, and a dangerous man who had just announced himself at the gate. Keep that box close, he said. I always do. He went to bed that night and did not sleep for 2 hours. When he finally did, he dreamed about his father, not the sick version, not the last year, but earlier, when Wade was maybe 12, and they'd ridden the full perimeter of Harper Ridge together on a clear fall morning, and his father had said, every piece of this land is a choice. You can't keep what you're not willing to fight for. He woke before 4, lay still in the dark, then got up because there was work to do. The ride to Slocum's property the next morning did not go the way Wade had intended, which was to say, it went considerably worse. Garrett Slocum was a man who had been born with enough money to never develop patience and enough intelligence to be genuinely dangerous without being wise. He was standing on his front porch when Wade and Marcus rode in, which meant he'd had someone watching for them, which meant the water hadn't been an accident. Harper, Slocum said. Pleasantly. The way you speak to someone you've already decided you've beaten. I heard you've been having some trouble lately. The Eastern Channel is blocked, Wade said. I'd like to know why. Well now. Slocum rested his hands on the porch rail. There's been some maintenance going on, necessary repairs to my upstream infrastructure. It may affect flow to neighboring properties temporarily. He said temporarily with a particular quality that meant the opposite. These things happen. I'd like access to inspect the gate. I'm afraid that's not possible during active maintenance. Slocum! Wade kept his voice level. The channel agreement my father signed with your father gives Harper Ridge rights to that water. Blocking that flow without notice is a breach. Your legal interpretation of a 20-year-old agreement. Slocum smiled, and it was a brother to the smile Aldous Crane had worn in the yard 2 nights before, the smile of a man who knows how the game has already been set up and is simply waiting for you to figure it out. I'd suggest speaking with a lawyer, though I understand your legal expenses have been considerable lately. Marcus beside him said absolutely nothing. Wade had always appreciated this about Marcus, his ability to hold himself exactly still while another man showed his hand. The water will be restored, Wade said. One way or another. Slocum shrugged elegantly. I suppose we'll see, won't we? They rode back without speaking for the first 10 minutes. Then Marcus said, He knew about the bank letter. Yes. Which means he's either watching your mail or he has someone inside Millhaven. Either way. Wade's hands were steady on the reins. Slocum and Crane. Whether they're connected directly or just both circling the same prey doesn't much matter right now. Marcus was quiet. Then, in his measured way, Wade, how bad is it total? All of it together. Wade considered the landscape of it, the bank, the water crane, Slocum, the crew holding on by loyalty and hot meals, the ledger in a locked box under a cook's cot. It's bad, he said honestly. It's the worst it's been. Marcus nodded slowly. All right. All right. Wade glanced at him. All right, Marcus repeated. Then we know where we stand. He clicked his tongue at his horse. Let's go see what Elena made for lunch. Mash. She'd made chicken and dumplings because she had somehow produced a chicken from circumstances Wade did not fully understand and chose not to question. The men came in from the noon break, and the smell hit them at the door. And for a few minutes the accumulated weight of banks and water rights and dangerous men from St. Louis receded to the background of something as simple and necessary as a good meal eaten among people you trusted. Wade sat at the table. He ate. He watched Elena move through the kitchen, and he watched the men without them knowing he was watching, and he thought about what his father had said. Every piece of this land is a choice. He looked up. Elena had paused at the end of the table, refilling the water pitcher, and for just a moment she met his eyes. Not a long look, not loaded with anything he could easily name. Just a look between two people who understood, without having agreed to it, that they were in the same fight. Then she moved on. Refilled the glasses. Said something to Remy that made the boy laugh. Wade set down his fork. For the first time since the bank letter arrived, he did not feel entirely alone inside the problem. He wasn't sure whether that was a comfort or the most terrifying thing that had happened all week. He suspected it might be both. The letter from the federal marshal's office arrived 4 days after Wade sent his. That was faster than he'd expected, and the speed of it told him something before he even broke the seal. It told him someone else had already been in contact with that office about Aldous Crane. He read it standing at the kitchen table because he'd been too impatient to sit. Elena was at the stove. He read the letter twice, then set it flat on the table and pressed his hand over it like he was making sure it couldn't move. What does it say? She asked. There's a deputy marshal named Holt Briggs out of Caperton. He's been building a case on Crane for 14 months. He looked up. He wants to meet. Says he has reason to believe there's physical evidence that could close the case, and he received my letter at a, he checked the wording, fortuitous time. Elena had gone very still at the stove, very carefully still. He means the ledger, she said. He means the ledger. She turned around slowly. Wade, if Crane finds out there's a marshal involved, he'll move faster. I know. He folded the letter. Which is exactly why I'm riding to Caperton tomorrow. You're leaving the ranch. For 1 day, Cal's in charge. Marcus has the watch schedule. He met her eyes. And you're staying here with the crew, not alone, and that locked box does not leave your person. Are we clear? She looked at him with that measuring quality she had, the one that assessed without judging, that weighed things honestly and came to conclusions based on evidence rather than feeling. Then she said, I should come with you. No. The ledger is useless without me to explain it. I built those records. I know every entry, every code Prentice used, every name behind the numbers. She folded her arms. A box of papers is circumstantial. A witness who kept the books is a case. He stared at her. She was right. He hated that she was right, because her being right meant putting her on a road where Crane had already shown he had eyes, and the thought of that produced something in his chest that he was not yet prepared to examine directly. If we ride at dawn and ride hard, we're in Caperton before noon, she said. We meet with Briggs, we give him what he needs, and we're back before dark. And if Crane has men on the Caperton Road, then we deal with that." She said it the way she said most things plainly, without dramatizing it like a problem to be solved, rather than a catastrophe to be feared. "I've been running from this man for 2 years, Wade. I am done running." The room held that for a moment. He thought about the stableman in Garvey Falls. He thought about Remy saying nobody's going to let that man get to you, with the absolute conviction of a 19-year-old who has never been tested and might surprise everyone, including himself, when he is. He thought about his father's voice early in the morning in a half-remembered dream. "You can't keep what you're not willing to fight for." "Dawn," he said. "We ride at dawn. You bring the box." Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly. More like the particular steadiness of a person who has been holding a great deal together by themselves for a very long time and has just been told credibly that they don't have to do it alone. "I'll have something ready to eat before we go," she said. He almost smiled. "I figured you would." He told Cal that night, and Cal's response was to say nothing for 30 full seconds, which was how Cal processed the things he considered genuinely significant. Then, "You want 2 men to ride out with you at first light and take the East Fork instead of the main road. Longer, but less visible." "I was thinking the same thing. Take Marcus. He knows that country and he's not someone people remember seeing." Cal pulled his hat down. "I'll keep the rest here in tight. You're back by dark or I send Remy to Caperton, and God help everyone if it comes to that." Wade almost laughed. It surprised him, the laugh, the easy warmth of it, the fact that it existed at all given the situation. He hadn't laughed it much recently. "Keep the east pasture watched," he said. "If Slocum tries anything with the fence or the remaining water while I'm gone." "I'll handle Slocum," Cal said with a flatness that suggested Garrett Slocum's continued well-being depended on his cooperation. "You worry about the road." Ed. They left before first light. The 3 of them, Wade, Elena, and Marcus, riding east before cutting south toward Caperton on the longer, quieter route that added 2 hours to the trip and passed through terrain that offered cover without announcing it. Elena rode well. He'd half expected it. She'd been comfortable in the barn with the mare, and people who knew horses rarely forgot how to sit one. But the ease of it, the quiet competence of the way she handled the animal, still caught him slightly off guard. Marcus rode ahead and behind at intervals, scouting with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had done this kind of work before in contexts he'd never fully explained, and no one had ever pressed him on. They didn't talk much for the first hour. The morning was cold, and the road was rough, and there was enough to think about without filling the air with words. But somewhere around the halfway point, when the sun had climbed enough to take the edge off the cold, and the immediate urgency of the first leg had settled into the steady rhythm of hard riding, Elena spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, not challengingly, genuinely. He glanced at her. "Riding to Caperton. All of it. Crane is my problem. The bank is yours. Slocum is yours. Taking on my trouble on top of everything the ranch is already carrying." She shook her head slightly. "It doesn't add up to anything practical for you." He thought about that for a moment. He could have given her the practical version that shutting Crane down removed a threat from the ranch, and that having a deputy marshal on side might have collateral benefits for a man in his position. It would have been true enough. Instead, he said, "My father used to say the worst thing a person can do is look away from trouble because it isn't technically theirs." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "I've been looking away from a lot of things for a while. I'm tired of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What have you been looking away from?" He hadn't meant to leave that door open, and he took a second to consider whether he wanted to walk through it. "Mostly myself," he said. She didn't push it. She didn't fill the silence with commentary or reassurance. She just rode, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind again, the kind that had started appearing in the kitchen and had nothing polite or careful about it. Just 2 people who had decided to be honest near each other and found it was less difficult than they'd expected. I've been looking away too, she said eventually. Quiet. Not looking at him. From what? A pause. From the fact that I'm good at taking care of other people's things, and not very good at believing I deserve anything of my own. She said it evenly the way she said everything, but there was a weight underneath it that she wasn't fully managing to conceal. Running from Crane wasn't just about the ledger. Part of it was... She stopped. Part of it was easier than staying somewhere and letting it matter. He looked at her profile. The clean line of it. The set of her jaw that was part composure and part something that had been holding for a very long time. It matters, he said. She glanced at him. Quick, then away. The ranch, she said. A half question. Among other things, he said. Marcus appeared at the crest of the ridge ahead of them, waving them forward. The moment closed the way moments do, when there's work to do, and they rode on without revisiting it. But it sat between them differently than before, not as an unfinished thing, but as something quietly acknowledged, set aside, not because it wasn't real, but because the timing was what it was. Deputy Marshal Holt Briggs was a compact man of about 50 with a gray mustache and eyes that had the focused stillness of someone who had spent a long career listening to people lie, and had developed an efficient system for detecting it. He met them at a building 2 blocks off Caperton's main street, not the marshal's office, a distinction he explained immediately. Crane has people watching the official office, he said without preamble. Has for 8 months. I do sensitive meetings here. He looked at Elena. You're the bookkeeper. I am. Let me see what you've got. She set the box on the table, unlocked it with a small key from around her neck, and began laying out the contents with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything. Briggs watched without touching anything, his eyes moving over the pages with a speed that told you he'd been waiting for exactly this and knew what he was looking for. After 4 minutes, he sat back. Miss Brooks, he said, do you understand what you're holding? I do. This is not just Crane. These accounts... He tapped a page without touching it. These run through 2 county administrators, a land assessor in Millhaven, and a circuit judge I have been trying to connect to Crane's operation for 11 months. He looked up. This is the whole network. Wade went very still. The land assessor in Millhaven, he said carefully. What's his name? Briggs looked at him. Why? Because I have a creditor there who has been unusually aggressive about a foreclosure timeline, and a neighbor who has been interfering with my water rights at a timing that feels coordinated. He held the marshal's gaze. I want to know if I'm dealing with coincidence or strategy. Briggs studied him for a moment with those still assessing eyes. Then he turned the page slightly so Wade could see the name at the top of the account column. Aldous Crane, Garrett Slocum. And beneath those in Prentice's neat-coded hand, a name that went with the Millhaven bank that held Wade's mortgage. It wasn't coincidence. It had never been coincidence. Slocum and Crane weren't separate pressures on Harper Ridge. They were the same pressure working from different angles, and the bank, his bank, the one sending him letters with dates on them, had been part of the apparatus the entire time. The foreclosure wasn't a business decision. It was a land grab. Someone had decided to take Harper Ridge, and they had been patient and systematic and thorough about making it happen. He sat with that for 15 seconds, which was exactly how long it took for the cold fury to arrive, settle, and become useful. What do you need from us? He asked Briggs. His voice was steady. Everything in that box properly testified to. I need Miss Brooks's full statement, and I need it documented. Briggs was already reaching for paper. And I need time, 2 weeks to move on this quietly before Crane gets wind of it. We may not have 2 weeks, Wade said. Crane has already come to the ranch. He knows she's there. Briggs went still. He came himself. Last week. The marshal swore under his breath quietly, precisely the way a professional swears when the timeline has just moved on him. Then we have less runway than I thought. He looked at Elena. Are you willing to give a formal statement today? All of it. Names, dates, everything. Yes, she said, without hesitation. Briggs looked at her for a moment with something that might have been respect in a face that was professionally reluctant to show it. "It'll take 2 to 3 hours. Then we'd better start," she said. "Nashig." They were 2 hours in when Marcus, who had been watching the street from the window at intervals with the unobtrusive diligence of a man who took this kind of work seriously, came to the door of the back room and said very quietly, "Company." Wade was on his feet before the word finished. "How many?" "2 men. Didn't ride in together, but they're moving the same way, circling the block." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact. "One of them I recognize, he was in Mill Haven 2 weeks ago. Cranes." Briggs was already moving. "Is there anything that ties this location to my name?" "Nothing official," Marcus said. "Then we have a few minutes." He looked at Elena. "Is the statement complete enough to be actionable?" She and Briggs exchanged a look over the documents between them. "Enough," she said. "Then we move." Briggs gathered the papers with brisk efficiency. "There's a back way out that takes you to the livery alley. Your horses are already there." "Yes?" Marcus said. "Go. I'll follow a different route with the documents. We don't all leave together." He looked at Wade. "Get her back to your ranch. Keep her there. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. Wade was already at the door. He looked back at Elena. She was on her feet, box-locked key around her neck, coat on. Ready. No wasted motion, no visible panic, just that absolute focused calm that he had first seen in his kitchen pantry and had spent 2 weeks learning to read correctly. It wasn't detachment. It was the kind of composure that costs something and is chosen anyway. "Let's go," he said. She nodded. They went. Cool. The ride back was harder and faster, and they didn't take the scenic route. Marcus pushed the pace, and Wade rode close to Elena without making a performance of it, and they moved through the back country with the particular focused urgency of people who know they're being tracked and are making decisions about terrain rather than thinking about anything else. They didn't speak until they were an hour out from Caperton, and the trail behind them had stayed clear long enough to breathe. Then Elena said, "They knew we went to Caperton." "Yes." "Which means someone at the ranch." She stopped. He could hear her working through it. "Or someone who saw us leave," he said. "Or someone watching the Caperton road who put it together." "Do you trust your crew?" "Completely." She accepted that. "Then it's someone watching from the outside." Slocum's land shares a long border with mine on the north side. He could have had eyes on the main gate for weeks. He'd been thinking about this for the past 20 minutes. The geometry of it. The reach of it. It doesn't change what we do next. What do we do next? We get back to the ranch. We wait for Briggs. We do not give Crane or Slocum any reason to move before the marshal is in position. He glanced at her. And we make sure the crew is ready for whatever comes before that. You think something comes before that? I think a man like Crane doesn't send 2 watchers to Caperton and then wait patiently for us to rebuild our position. He watched the trail ahead. He's going to try something soon. He always does when he thinks the end is near. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he burned a warehouse once, in St. Louis. A man who owed him money and had decided to fight back instead of pay. Crane sent men at night and burned the warehouse with all the inventory inside. She said it without drama. He didn't touch the man himself. He just removed everything the man was trying to protect. The implication hung in the cold air between them. "The cattle," Wade said. "Or the barn, or the feed supply." She kept her voice level. "Something that demonstrates what it costs to resist him. Something designed to break morale before the main pressure comes." He thought about the Harper Ridge barn. The cattle, already thinned by a difficult year, representing most of what remained of the ranch's liquid value. The crew he'd just committed to protecting. Remy Alcott with his boots on the right feet, and his 19-year-old conviction that things would work out. He pushed his horse faster. They arrived back at Harper Ridge at 4:30 an hour before dark, and Wade knew within 30 seconds of riding into the yard that something had already happened. Cal was standing in the barn door with his arms crossed, and his face carrying the particular set expression of a man who has contained a situation but has not resolved it and wants very much to speak to someone who has authority to resolve it. Remy was beside him, and Remy looked not frightened exactly. Shaken. The specific shaken quality of someone who has learned for the first time that the world can move against you while you're standing right there watching it. "What happened?" Wade said before he was fully off his horse. "Someone cut the fence on the east pasture," Cal said. 12 head of cattle are gone, not scattered driven. Deliberate. He kept his voice flat. "We found the cut at noon. By the time Marcus figured the timing, the tracks were old enough that following was pointless. 12 head. The calculation hit Wade fast and hard. Not panic, but the cold arithmetic of loss of how close to the edge 12 head pushed him when he was already operating on the margin of what the ranch could absorb. Anyone see anything? That's the other thing. Cal's jaw tightened. Remy saw a rider, early morning north fence line. He went out to check the fence because something felt off, and he came back and told me and I... He stopped. I should have taken it more seriously than I did. It wasn't your fault, Remy said with a raw earnestness that made it clear he thought it was at least partly his own. I should have pushed harder when I came back in. I told Cal there was a rider and I let it sit there. Remy, Wade said. The boy looked at him. You reported what you saw. That's what you're supposed to do. He held the young man's gaze long enough for it to land. This is not on you. Any of it. Clear. Remy exhaled, nodded. Wade turned back to Cal. What else? The water is still blocked. And... Cal hesitated, which was not something Cal Dutton did casually. There was a note, left on the porch, I don't know when. He held it out, a folded piece of paper, no envelope. Wade opened it, 3 words written in a confident, unhurried hand. This can stop. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his pocket. Felt Elena beside him, not touching, not speaking, just present, and the quality of her presence in that moment was the same quality as a hand on the shoulder, the same weight and steadiness. All right, he said, to Cal. To all of them, because the other hands had gathered at the sound of the horses and were standing in a loose group behind Cal, watching him with the particular attention of people who take their read on the situation from the man at the center of it. Gather everyone, inside, now. He stood at the head of the table and told them everything. About the ledger and Briggs and Caperton. About the name on the account that connected Slocum to Crane to the bank that held his mortgage. About the watchers in Caperton and the note on the porch and what it meant and what came next. He didn't soften it. He didn't editorialize. He put it in front of them the way you put a map on a table, not to tell people what to feel about the terrain, but to make sure they could see exactly where they were standing. When he finished, Marcus said, So the foreclosure was never about the debt. No. They want the land. The ranch sits on the best water access in the county. Take away Slocum's property and add Harper Ridge, and you control the water for 6 surrounding operations. He let that sit for a moment. That's worth a great deal more than what they're owed. The room absorbed this. Then Remy and his voice was different now. Not the earnest youth trying to prove something, but someone who had just had something clicked into focus, said, So what do? We hold, Wade said. Briggs moves within 48 hours. Until then, we do not give them a reason to escalate beyond what they've already done. The note says, it can stop, which means they're still negotiating, still believing they can pressure us out without a full confrontation. We use that window. He looked around the table. Double watch tonight. Nobody rides out alone. Nobody goes near the north fence without company. Elena. I heard you, she said from her position near the stove. She looked at him steadily. I won't argue with the precautions. I know you won't. He held her gaze for one moment, and in that moment, something passed between them that the room could see, but that had no words yet. Something acknowledged and set carefully aside, the way you handle something fragile when there isn't yet a safe place to put it down. Cal cleared his throat. Marcus and I take first watch. Remy, you're with Jensen on second. Remy straightened. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. but Cal's voice was almost gentle about it. The men dispersed to their duties, to the watch positions, to the quiet, focused business of people who have made a decision and are living inside it. The kitchen began to empty. Wade stayed at the table. He spread the note flat and looked at those 3 words again. This can stop. He thought about 12 head of cattle driven off in the night by men who knew the terrain. He thought about the water still blocked. He thought about Holt Briggs 40 miles away, with a collection of documents that could take down a network of corruption that had been operating for years if he could get them in front of the right people before Crane did something that couldn't be undone. He thought about a locked box and a woman who had been running for 2 years and had finally decided to stop. He heard her moving behind him, the sounds of the kitchen, her movements through it, the particular cadence of someone who had made this space their own. He heard the soft sound of something being set on the table beside him, and he looked down. A cup of coffee. Strong the way he took it. He looked up. She was already moving back to the stove. "Elena," he said. She stopped. "When this is over." He stopped. Started again. "When Briggs has what he needs, and Crane is dealt with, and the land is settled, what do you want?" She turned to look at him. The question seemed to catch her somewhere she hadn't been expecting, somewhere genuine and unguarded, somewhere that the wall didn't quite cover. "I don't know," she said, and the honesty in it was complete. "Think about it," he said, quietly, not as a request, as something that mattered. She looked at him for a moment with those careful eyes and something behind them that was no longer entirely careful. "You too," she said. She went back to the stove. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Outside, the night was coming in, and somewhere beyond the fence line, men were watching the dark and waiting for whatever moved through it. But inside the kitchen, the lamp was lit. The stove was warm. And Wade Harper, for the first time in as long as he could remember, felt the particular quiet clarity of a man who knows what he is fighting for. All of it. The land and the crew and the woman by the stove, and has decided without reservation that it is worth everything he has to give. The note sat on the table. "This can stop." He turned it face down. It wasn't stopping. Not tonight. Not on their terms. He had work to do. The first night passed without incident, which was almost worse than if something had happened. Wade knew that particular silence. The silence that precedes a decision on the other side of things, when the people moving against you have already committed to a course and are simply waiting for the angle that serves them best. He'd learned it from his father, who had learned it from decades of working land that other people periodically decided they wanted. When the quiet goes wrong, his father used to say it goes wrong fast. You had to be positioned before the fast part started, not scrambling to catch up after. He slept 2 hours. Maybe 3. He was at the kitchen table before Elena came in at 5, and she took one look at him and didn't say anything about the hours, just started the stove and put the coffee on. That was something he had come to rely on without noticing when it started her ability to read a room and give it exactly what it needed, rather than what seemed polite. "Briggs said 48 hours, she said. "Yes. That's today." "Yes?" He wrapped his hands around the cup she set in front of him. "If he moves on schedule." "And if he doesn't?" He looked at her. She was at the stove, back to him, voice steady. She wasn't asking out of fear. She was asking because she was the kind of person who worked better knowing the contingency, who needed the full map, even the bad parts. "Then we hold longer," he said. "And we adapt." She nodded. That was enough for her. The crew came in for breakfast in shifts, quieter than usual, but not anxious. There was a difference, and Wade noted it with something close to gratitude. These men had made their decision and were living cleanly inside it. Marcus looked like he'd slept fine because Marcus was constitutionally capable of sleeping fine regardless of circumstance, a quality Wade had always privately admired. Cal looked like he'd slept poorly, but would not admit it. Remy looked like he hadn't slept at all and was currently running entirely on Elena's biscuits and the conviction that this made him tougher. It didn't make him tougher, but it made him present, which mattered. "North fence is clean," Marcus said between bites. "Nothing moved overnight." East side, Wade asked. Jensen walked it at 3. Clear. Slocum's Watergate. A pause. Marcus set down his fork. Still closed, but I rode by the upstream channel this morning on my way back. The gate mechanism has been modified. It's not a simple blockage anymore. Someone put work into that closure. Wade absorbed this. Modified meant permanent intent. Modified meant Slocum had moved from pressure to position, was no longer threatening to block the water, was building infrastructure around blocking the water, was betting that Harper Ridge would be gone before the legal challenge could wind through a court system he had reason to believe was compromised. He knows about Briggs, Wade said. Cal looked up sharply. How? He doesn't know specifically, but he knows something changed when we rode to Caperton. He knows we didn't fold after the cattle were taken. He pushed back from the table. He's accelerating because he thinks the window is closing. Elena turned around from the stove. Then we need Briggs to move today. I know. Is there a way to contact him directly without going through the Caperton office? He gave me a name at the dry goods store in Millhaven, a man who passes messages. Wade looked at Cal. I need someone to ride to Millhaven this morning, someone Crane's people won't recognize as Harper Ridge. Cal thought for exactly 2 seconds. Jensen. He came from Amarillo 3 months ago. No one in Millhaven knows his face. Jensen was a quiet, solid man of 30 who did his work without comment and had the particular reliability of someone who understood that being underestimated was occasionally an asset. He looked up from the end of the table when his name was spoken. What do you need? He asked. Wade wrote the message himself. 6 words. Move now. They know. Harper Ridge. He folded it into an envelope and sealed it and handed it to Jensen, along with the name and the address, and told him to ride casual and come back the long way. Don't stop in Millhaven longer than you need to, he said. Jensen nodded, pocketed the envelope, and finished his breakfast without hurrying. That was the right instinct. Nothing draws attention like urgency. Jensen had been gone 40 minutes when the second note appeared. Not on the porch this time, on the well. Remy found it tied to the well handle with a length of cord, and he brought it in without touching more of it than necessary, holding it between 2 fingers, with the careful caution of someone who has been paying attention. He set it on the kitchen table and stepped back. Wade opened it. This one was longer than the first. 5 lines in that same confident, unhurried hand. You contacted the federal office. We know. The marshal you're counting on has a superior who owes a debt. The documents will not reach the right hands. You have until sundown to make a reasonable decision. After sundown, we stop asking. He read it twice. Set it down. Looked at Elena. She had read it over his shoulder. Her face was composed, but her eyes were doing something complicated, moving through the implications with that quick analytical speed she had, working the angles calculating. He's lying, she said. About which part? About Briggs's superior. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat leaning forward slightly. Crane lies strategically. He tells you a thing that's impossible to verify quickly, something that creates enough doubt to make you hesitate. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be believable enough to cost you time. How can you be sure? Because I kept the books, she said. I know how he spends his money and where his influence reaches. He has a judge in Millhaven and 2 county administrators and a man in the land assessor's office. He does not have a federal marshal's superior officer. She held his gaze. If he did, he would have used that card 6 months ago, not now. Wade sat with this. She was reasoning from evidence, not from hope. He knew the difference by now, knew the quality of her thinking well enough to trust it, even when what she was saying was what he wanted to hear. But we can't be certain, he said. No, she agreed. We can't. A pause. Which is exactly what he's counting on. He looked at the note. After sundown, we stop asking. A threat with a deadline, which meant Crane was on his own timeline, which meant he was close positioned and ready to move. The note wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of intent dressed as an offer. Wade? Elena's voice was careful, specific. If Crane moves tonight and Briggs isn't in position, I know. Then we need a plan that doesn't depend on Briggs. He looked at her. She was steady, her hands flat on the table, her eyes clear. Not telling him what the plan should be. Just naming the reality so they were both working from the same ground. I've been thinking about that, he said. Tell me. He laid it out. It wasn't elegant, but it was practical. The kind of plan that accounts for the people you have and the terrain you're working with and the specific nature of what's coming at you. He talked, and she listened, and twice she asked the right question at the right moment, and once she suggested a modification that was better than what he'd had, and he took it without discussion because it was simply better. When he finished, she said, Remy. What about him? He can't be on the perimeter tonight. He's brave and he means it, but he's not seasoned enough for what might come at the fence line after dark, and I don't want... She stopped, chose the words carefully. He's 19. Don't put him where a mistake costs him everything. He looked at her. She was looking at the table, not at him, but there was something in her voice. Not sentimentality, something more practical than that. Like she had been 19 once in a situation that required more than she had, and the memory of what that cost had never fully left her. He'll push back, Wade said. I know. Tell him anyway. I will. She looked up then, and whatever she'd been working through on the inside had been put back in its place. The composure was back clean and complete. But it was a different composure than the one she'd arrived with 2 weeks ago. The old one had been a door shut. This one was a door held. Remy pushed back predictably and emphatically, and in terms that suggested he had given the matter considerable personal offense. I can hold a rifle as well as Jensen, and I've been here 3 months longer. Remy! Wade didn't raise his voice. I need someone I trust completely to stay in the house with a clear line to the kitchen. If something comes over the north fence and gets past the perimeter, I need to know this building is covered. He held the young man's eyes. That's not the consolation position. That's the position I'm trusting you with because I need it held, and I need it held right. Remy was quiet for a moment, working through it. Is that true? He asked. Directly, which was one of the things Wade had come to appreciate about him. Yes, Wade said. It is. Remy exhaled through his nose. All right. Good. And Remy, your rifle stays loaded and stays close. If anyone comes to that kitchen door after full dark, that isn't one of us, you don't ask questions. The boy nodded. His jaw was set and his eyes were serious, and he looked in that moment considerably older than 19 Metchog. Jensen came back at 2 in the afternoon, alone, which was what Wade had expected. But his face carried something when he rode in, not fear, not alarm. Something closer to the contained urgency of a man who had been given information that changes the shape of things. He dismounted and went directly to Wade. The man at the dry goods store, he said low. He took the message, and then he told me something I don't think was part of the original arrangement. What? Briggs is already moving. Left Caperton this morning with 2 deputies. Jensen paused. But there's a complication. The Millhaven Judge Haskell, he issued a writ this morning. An injunction against federal interference in what he's calling a private land and credit dispute. Jensen looked at him steadily. The man at the store says Briggs can't execute his warrants until the writ is challenged, and challenging it goes back through Millhaven. Wade stared at him. Crane knew, he said. Not a question. Looks that way. The scope of it expanded again the way it kept doing each new layer, revealing another, like pulling at a thread and discovering the whole garment was one piece. Crane hadn't been bluffing about influence in the system. He'd been precise about where that influence was placed. He hadn't bought a federal superior. He'd bought a local judge, and a local judge with a writ could tie federal action in procedural knots for days. Long enough for sundown. Long enough for whatever happened after sundown. Wade turned. Cal was behind him close enough to have heard. Cal said, How long to challenge the writ? Days. Wade said. "Unless someone with standing argues it immediately before a federal magistrate." He stopped. Thought. The ledger. The accounts, they show direct payment to Haskell from Crane's operation. That's corruption of a judicial officer. Federal crime. That supersedes Haskell's writ entirely. Cal's eyes sharpened. Briggs has the documents. Briggs has copies. Elena has the originals and her testimony. He was already moving toward the house. Get Marcus. Get everyone positioned now. I don't know if Crane was counting on us figuring this out in time or not, but I'm not giving him the benefit of waiting. Elena was in the kitchen when he came in fast, and she read the situation off his face before he said a word. What happened? He told her. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for precisely 4 seconds, which he now knew was her processing speed. For significant information, 4 seconds from input to conclusion. Haskell's name is in the ledger, she said. Column 7, fourth quarter of last year. 12 payments labeled as consulting fees. The dates correspond to 3 rulings he made in land disputes that went Crane's way. She was already moving to the back room. If Briggs can get that specific accounting in front of a federal magistrate today. Can we reach Briggs directly, not through Millhaven? She stopped, turned. There's a telegraph office in Bower Creek, 15 miles west. I know it. If Briggs is already moving toward Millhaven, he'd pass within 5 miles of Bower Creek. She held his gaze. If someone rides hard and gets there before he does, they could telegraph ahead to his deputies to redirect him. That someone would be riding through open country between here and Bower Creek, he said. Country that Crane's people are likely watching. Yes, she said. They would be. A beat. I'll go, she said. No, Wade. Her voice was quiet and absolutely firm. I can identify Haskell's payments by memory. I don't need the ledger in my hands. I have the numbers, the dates, and the corresponding case rulings memorized, because I had to memorize them in case the box was ever taken from me. I can give Briggs's deputies everything they need in 15 minutes. She looked at him. Nobody else in this building can do that. He stood at the kitchen door and looked at her and hated the logic of it, with the particular clean-edged hatred of a man who knows he's going to agree with something because it's right and not because he wants to. Marcus rides with you, he said. Agreed. You don't stop. You don't wait if something looks wrong. You ride straight through. Agreed. And Elena? He stopped. Wade. Come back, he said. Just that. Low and direct, and carrying everything he wasn't saying around it. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face moved a shift, not large, not dramatic, but real. The kind of real that comes from somewhere that composure doesn't reach. I intend to, she said. They were gone 11 minutes later. He watched them clear the gate and let himself watch for exactly 5 seconds. Marcus's steady seat, Elena's clean, upright posture, both horses moving fast and purposeful. And then he turned back to the yard. Cal. Here. Double the east perimeter. If Crane's moving before sundown, he comes from the north or he comes from the east, and I want both covered before the light goes. He checked the sky. 3 hours of daylight, maybe less. Jensen, you're with me on the main approach. Remy. Kitchen, Remy said. His voice was clear and steady. I heard you the first time. Good. Wade looked at him 1 extra second. You're doing right, son. Remy blinked. Then he nodded once and went inside. The first shot came from the north at 20 minutes before sundown, and it was a warning shot, high and deliberate, the kind fired by someone who wants to announce they are not interested in subtlety anymore. Wade was at the east fence line when he heard it. He moved before the echo finished. North perimeter. Cal's voice carrying across the yard with the controlled volume of a man who knows how to project without causing panic. 2 riders, maybe 3. They're staying at range. Wade ran. The ground was hard under his boots and the cold air burned in his lungs, and he thought with the particular clarity that comes when things are finally moving after a long period of pressure. This is what he was waiting for. The ranch broken down enough that it couldn't defend on two sides at once. He'd been thinking about that. He'd been thinking about it for 2 days. He reached the north fence and took position beside Marcus's usual spot, except Marcus wasn't here. Marcus was on the Bower Creek Road, and what he had was Cal and 2 hands, and Remy in the kitchen, and the riders on the north line were 3 men who were maintaining distance, which meant they weren't the main event. They were the distraction. "Cal," he said low. "I see it," Cal said right beside him. He'd read it too. "They're keeping us looking north." "East side," Wade said. "Now." They ran. The east fence was where the remaining cattle were penned for the night. It was also where the fence had already been cut once. It was the most valuable, most vulnerable point on the property, and if you wanted to take something or burn something or do damage that couldn't be undone before morning, that was where you went. 3 men came over the east fence at a dead run, and they were not there to negotiate. What happened in the next 4 minutes was the kind of thing that gets told in bunkhouses for years afterward, not because it was heroic in any organized sense, but because it was the collision of 2 groups of people who had both decided at the same moment that they were done with waiting. Wade took the first man at the fence line physically, not with a weapon, because the man was close enough that a rifle was the wrong tool. And what it took was the fence post, and the man's own momentum, and the particular leverage of someone who had been working land his whole life, and had the physical knowledge of exactly how much force goes where. The man went down hard and stayed down. Cal handled the second with a focused efficiency that suggested he had done this particular kind of work before and had no strong feelings about doing it again. The third man stopped. He was 6 feet from the cattle pen, close enough to have reached it, and he stopped because he had looked at the 2 men in front of him and made a rapid and accurate calculation about his odds, and because the sound of a rifle being cocked from the direction of the house was a persuasive addition to that calculation. Remy Alcott was standing at the kitchen window with his rifle leveled and his face entirely steady. The third man put his hands up. They had the 3 men secured to the fence post when Jensen came in from the north side with news that the riders up there had turned and gone the moment the east side went loud, which confirmed they'd been a diversion and nothing more. Whatever Crane had hoped this engagement would accomplish, it hadn't worked. The cattle were secure. The crew was intact, and 3 of Crane's men were sitting in the dirt with their hands tied, and a very young man watching them with a rifle, and a conviction that absolutely nothing was going to move on his watch. Wade looked at the 3 men. He crouched in front of the one who seemed most likely to be senior, the one who had stopped calculating instead of just stopping. "Who sent you?" Silence. "You're looking at criminal trespass, destruction of property, and attempted theft," Wade said. "That's before we add the assault charge from 2 nights ago when you drove 12 head of my cattle off my land." He let that sit. "Deputy Marshal Briggs is going to be on this property by tomorrow morning. What you tell me tonight determines whether I have anything to say on your behalf when he gets here." The man looked at him. He was not young, early 40s, experienced in the way that men who do this kind of work get experienced, which is to say, careful and hard-used. He was also, Wade realized, smart enough to know when the odds had shifted beyond recovery. "Crane," he said. "Aldous Crane. He hired us out of Millhaven." "What were you hired to do tonight?" A pause. "Take the cattle, and the woman." The word landed like a stone in still water. "The woman is not here," Wade said. His voice did not change. He was very deliberate about that. The man said nothing. But something in his expression shifted something that told Wade that not here had not been part of the plan, and that not here was information that was going to matter. He stood up, looked at Cal. "Watch them," he said. He walked to the house. Remy was still at the window, rifle down now, watching him come in with an expression that was trying to be calm and mostly succeeding. "They were going to take her," Remy said. Not a question. "Yes." "She's not here." "No, she's not." He went to the kitchen table, looked at the lamp, Listen to the ranch around him, the cattle settling, the hands' voices low and steady, outside the particular quality of aftermath, which is always both relief and the recognition that the relief is temporary. Remy. Sir? He almost told him not to call him sir. He let it go. You did exactly right tonight, he said. Every part of it. Remy was quiet for a moment. My hands are shaking, he said. Honest about it, which was the right call. That's normal, Wade said. It means you're paying attention to what just happened. It'll pass. He looked at the boy. Put the rifle down and eat something. The shaking goes faster with food. Elena said the same thing once. About shock. Remy set the rifle against the wall. She told me a while back after she caught me trying to skip lunch on a cold day, she said the body settles when it knows it's been fed. Don't argue with your body, Remy. He almost smiled. I thought she was talking about food. She was, Wade said. And also other things. He poured a cup of coffee and wrapped his hands around it and thought about the Bower Creek Road and how far they'd gotten and whether Briggs had been redirected in time and whether the writ was being challenged right now in front of a federal magistrate who hadn't been bought. The lamp burned. The ranch was quiet. The 3 men outside were secured and the cattle were safe and the crew was intact. And Elena Brooks was out in the dark on a 15-mile road with Marcus Webb and everything she had memorized, riding toward the man who could end this riding toward the possibility of it finally actually being over. He set down the cup, went to the door, opened it, stood in the cold, and looked at the road and waited. They came back at 9:30. Wade heard the horses before he saw them. 2 sets of hooves on the hard ground, moving at a pace that was fast but not desperate, which told him the broad shape of things before any words were exchanged. Desperate people ride desperate. Marcus and Elena came in steady, and steady meant they'd gotten through. He was off the porch before they'd fully stopped. Elena dismounted, and her boots hit the ground, and she looked at him, straight at him first thing, before she looked at the yard or the house or anything else. And he understood that she'd been doing the same thing he'd been doing for the past several hours. Counting on someone being where they'd said they'd be. We reached Briggs's deputies at the telegraph office, she said. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it, an exhaustion, a release. The particular quality of a person who has been holding a great deal of tension for a long time and has just been told they can let some of it down. They redirected Briggs. He's going directly to the federal magistrate in Delaney County, not Millhaven. The magistrate there isn't connected to Crane's network. Haskell's writ will be challenged tonight. The deputies had enough from my statement to move on Haskell directly as well. She paused. They're treating it as obstruction of federal process. That supersedes the writ entirely. He exhaled. It came out longer than he'd meant it to. And here? She asked. Her eyes moved to the east fence line where the 3 secured men were visible in the lamplight, then back to him. They came for the cattle, he said, and for you. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They didn't get either. No, he said. They didn't. Marcus had already handed off his horse to Remy, who had appeared at the barn door with the wide-eyed energy of someone who had been managing adrenaline for 3 hours and was deeply relieved to have somewhere to direct it. Marcus stopped beside Wade on his way to the house and said quietly, She didn't hesitate once. The whole ride. Everything she gave those deputies, dates, figures, names, she had it all exactly right. He said it without drama, the way Marcus said everything, which made it land harder. That's a woman who's been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time. He went inside. Wade stood in the yard with Elena, and the cold settled around them, and the lamp from the kitchen threw its light across the ground between them. Come inside, he said. Eat something. Remy will tell you you're his hero, and you'll need to handle that with grace. Something moved across her face, a flicker, almost a smile. I'll manage, she said. Yuck. The next 12 hours were the kind that burn themselves into a person's memory, not through drama, but through density. One thing after another, each one carrying weight, until by the time you look back at the beginning of the sequence, it seems like days have passed instead of hours. Briggs arrived at Harper Ridge at 7 in the morning with 2 deputies and a federal magistrate's order that voided Haskell's writ and authorized warrant execution across 3 counties. He came into the kitchen, accepted the coffee Elena put in front of him with the gratitude of a man who had been writing since before dawn, and spread the documents on the table with the focused efficiency of someone who had been working toward this moment for 14 months and was not going to let sentiment slow him down now that it had arrived. He looked at Elena first. "Your statement held up completely." The magistrate was satisfied. "Haskell," she asked. "Suspended pending investigation. His cases are being reviewed." He looked at her steadily. "That includes every land ruling he made in the past 3 years. Wade caught the implication before she said it. "The Harper Ridge water easement dispute." Briggs looked at him. "There are 2 rulings from 18 months ago involving water rights in this county that are now under review, if either of them was influenced." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Wade's hands were flat on the table. He kept his voice controlled. "Slocum. We're executing a warrant at the Slocum property this morning. The accounts in the ledger show direct coordination between Slocum and Crane regarding property acquisition in this county. That's conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum." Briggs looked up. "The bank that holds your mortgage, the president of that institution, is also named in the ledger. We have a federal warrant for his correspondence as of this morning." The room was quiet. Remy, who was standing near the stove with his coffee and had been visibly trying not to react to any of this with the entirety of his feelings, said in a voice that was slightly strangled with the effort of understatement, "So the bank that was going to take the ranch was part of the operation from the beginning," Wade said. Remy set down his coffee very deliberately. "Well," he said. "Well," Cal agreed from the doorway. Briggs looked at Wade. "Your foreclosure proceedings are stayed pending the federal investigation. A court cannot move forward with a contested instrument while there's an active criminal inquiry into the parties that issued it." He paused. "That buys you time." "How much?" "Enough," Briggs said. "Enough to make your case properly." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was an honest one, and Wade Harper had long since learned to value honesty over comfort. "Where's Crane?" he said.
"At Troy."
That was the question. That was the one that mattered beneath all the others, because Crane was the center of it. Not Slocum, who was an opportunist. Not Haskell, who was bought. Not the bank president, who was complicit. Crane was the architect. And Crane had not been at Harper Ridge the night before. Crane had sent men and stayed clear, which was entirely consistent with what Elena had told him about how the man operated. He never put himself in the position of physical exposure. He never touched the dirty work himself, which meant he was somewhere close enough to direct it and far enough from it to deny it. Briggs' face told Wade he already knew this and was not satisfied with what he knew. "We have a location in Mill Haven where he's been operating. We're moving on it this morning." He folded his documents. "But I want you to understand Crane is careful. He has resources and he has exits. It's possible he'll run," Elena said. Briggs looked at her. "If he knows the writ failed, and he'll know because he has someone watching everything, he'll run." She was looking at the table, not at anyone, her voice precise and deliberate. "He doesn't fight when the position collapses. He leaves. He's done it before in Kansas and in Missouri. He rebuilds somewhere else." She looked up. "The only thing that stops him is if he doesn't have time." "How much time does he need?" "To be on a horse and pass the county line 2 hours. She said it flatly. "To move his liquid assets into accounts that can't easily be traced longer. But he'll take the 2 hours if that's all he has." Briggs checked his watch, stood. "Then we're not sitting here." He was gone in 4 minutes. Wade watched the marshal and his deputies ride out with the particular controlled urgency of federal law enforcement that has been given clearance and does not intend to waste it. The yard was quieter after they left. The 3 secured men from the night before had been taken into federal custody, which removed them from the east fence line and returned that corner of the ranch to something resembling normalcy. Cal came and stood beside him. "You think they'll catch him?" Cal asked. "I think if Elena's right about how he operates, it depends on whether Briggs moves fast enough." He watched the road where the deputies had gone. "And I think Elena has been right about every single thing she's told me since she walked into this kitchen." Cal was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the particular tone he used for important things that he was only going to say once, "She's not going anywhere, is she?" Wade didn't answer directly. He looked at the road for another moment. Then he went back inside. The morning moved with the strange normalcy of aftermath chores that needed doing regardless of what had happened the night before, animals that needed feeding, a ranch that did not pause its requirements because the people running it had been through something significant. Elena made breakfast, and the crew ate, and the conversation was low and real, and carried the particular quality of people who have been through something together and are quietly taking stock of the fact that they came through it. Remy told Elena, with the earnest gravity of a young man delivering important news, that he had been thinking about it and had concluded that she was the most capable person he had ever worked alongside, present company respectfully included. Elena looked at him for a moment. "You held that rifle exactly right last night," she said. "Your grandmother would be proud." Remy turned slightly red and concentrated very hard on his breakfast plate. Marcus, at the other end of the table, said nothing. But the slight upward movement at the corner of his mouth was as close to a grin as Marcus Webb got, and everyone at the table noticed it, and nobody mentioned it because some things are better honored by leaving them alone. The news from Millhaven arrived at noon. A rider, not one of Briggs's men, a local who'd been asked to carry the message, came in fast and handed Wade a folded note at the gate. Crane had run. He'd been at the Millhaven property when Briggs's deputies arrived, and by the time they secured the building, he was gone through the back 20 minutes ahead of them, maybe less. A horse missing from the livery 2 blocks away confirmed the direction. Briggs was in pursuit, and there were federal contacts posted on the territorial border roads. But Crane was in the wind. Wade read the note twice. Folded it. He was aware of Elena standing a few feet away. She'd seen the rider come in. She'd been watching him read. He looked at her. "He ran," he said. She nodded. "Once." She'd known it before he said it. "Briggs will catch him," Wade said. "Maybe." She said it honestly, not without hope, but without pretense. If not Briggs, then someone else. Eventually. She was quiet for a moment. "He's not the kind of man who stops. But he's also not the kind of man who can go back to operating the way he was once his network is exposed. The accounts, the names, the case rulings, all of it is on record now. Every judge, every administrator he owned is compromised. He has to start over from nothing." She looked at him steadily. "That's not nothing, Wade. That's the whole structure he spent 20 years building. It's gone." He looked at her. She was standing in the midday light, and she looked. He searched for the word and found it unguarded. It was the first time since she'd arrived, since that first morning in the pantry, that she looked fully unguarded. The vigilance was still in her. It would probably always be in her. It had been built in too deep to fully dissolve, but it wasn't governing everything the way it had been. It was just a part of her now instead of the whole of her. "The ranch," he said. "The foreclosure being stayed, that means time to restructure. If the bank instruments are found fraudulent, we may be able to have the debt renegotiated or discharged entirely." He shook his head slightly, still working through the scope of it. "And if Haskell's rulings on the water easement are overturned." "The water comes back," she said. "The water comes back. The east pasture is viable again. The cattle numbers can be rebuilt." He looked at her. "Harper Ridge survives." She looked at him with a particular expression, something warm and genuine that she had been letting show more often in the past few days, and that he had been quietly cataloging each time it appeared the way you catalog things that matter. "It was always going to survive," she said. "You were always going to find a way." "I wasn't," he said, "honest about it. Not alone, not the way things were going." He held her gaze. "You know that." She didn't deflect it, didn't minimize it. She just held his gaze back directly, which was one of the things about her he had come to value most, the directness, the refusal to perform modesty at the cost of truth. "I know," she said. Slocum's Watergate was restored to proper operation by federal order at 2 in the afternoon, which Cal confirmed by riding the East Channel himself and coming back with a report that the flow was returning to normal pressure. He delivered this information with the contained satisfaction of a man who has been waiting 11 months to hear it. "The cattle can move back to the east pasture tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow?" Wade agreed. "The fence needs work." "It'll get done." Cal nodded. He turned to go, then stopped. Looked back at Wade with the expression he used when he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. "She belongs here," he said. "I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just saying it out loud, because sometimes a thing needs to be said out loud." He put his hat on. "That's all." He went back to work. Wade stood in the yard and listened to the sounds of the ranch around him, the cattle, the horses, the voices of the men doing the ordinary necessary work of the place, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Something that had no dramatic name, that was simply the quiet presence of a life that had been emptied out and was in the process of being filled again. He went inside. Elena was in the kitchen, the way she was always in the kitchen, the way that had stopped feeling like professional habit some days ago and had begun to feel like something else. She was at the work table going through the supply inventory with the methodical care she brought to every task, making notes, calculating what was needed, planning ahead, the way she always planned ahead, because Elena Brooks had lived for 2 years without the luxury of taking tomorrow for granted, and had learned to be ready for it before it arrived. She heard him come in. She didn't look up immediately. She was finishing a line in the notebook, and that small thing finishing the line before looking up the absolute completion of the task. Before shifting attention was so entirely her that he felt it somewhere in his chest, the recognition of it. She looked up. He crossed the kitchen and stopped on the other side of the work table, not the length of the room, just the table, close enough that there was no ambiguity about intention. "I want you to stay," he said. She was still. Not the old stillness, not the careful, self-protective stillness of a woman managing her exposure. The stillness of someone who has just heard exactly what she needed to hear and is taking a moment to believe it. "As the cook," she said, not arguing, testing. "As whatever you decide to be," he said. "Cook partner, whatever comes next. But here, on this ranch," he held her eyes. "With me." The kitchen was quiet. From outside came the ordinary sounds of Harper Ridge in the afternoon. Cal's voice, the horses, the particular rhythm of a working ranch that had survived something and was still going. "I've been running for 2 years, she said. Her voice was low, honest. "I know. I'm not—" She stopped, exhaled, started again. "I'm not certain I know how to not run. What that looks like. What it feels like to just stay. I don't know how to let anyone close," he said. "What that looks like. What it feels like to not push people to a comfortable distance and call it management." He looked at her. "I think we're both going to have to figure it out." Something in her face, the last of it, the last layer of the distance, let go. "Yes," she said. "I think we are." He came around the table. She didn't step back. She tilted her face up slightly, and he looked at her, at this woman who had walked into his failing kitchen with a canvas bag and a set of questions that had rearranged everything. And then he kissed her. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was the kind of kiss that happens between people who have been circling something true for long enough that when they finally arrive at it, there's no performance left in it. Just the thing itself, quiet and real, and carrying the full weight of everything that had passed between them in the preceding weeks. The meals and the ledgers and the late-night conversations at the kitchen table, and the ride to Caperton, and the sound of horses coming back across dark ground. She kissed him back with the same directness she brought to everything. No hesitation, no pulling back. Her hands came up and rested against his chest, and she was present in it completely, the way Elena Brooks was present in every single thing she did, without reservation. When they separated, she looked at him with clear, steady eyes, and not a trace of the guard that had lived in them when she first arrived. "The flower still needs replacing," she said. He laughed. It was full and genuine, and surprised him completely the way the first real laugh always does after a long stretch without one. "I'll add it to the list," he said. Nyek. 3 weeks later, Deputy Marshal Holt Briggs sent word that Aldous Crane had been apprehended at the territorial border, turned in with some satisfaction, it appeared by a contact Crane had burned 2 years prior in a dispute over unpaid funds. The irony of it was complete and appropriate. Crane was in federal custody and would stand trial on 17 charges, including conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and the corruption of judicial and administrative officers across 3 territories. Garrett Slocum, faced with the exposure of his coordination with Crane, attempted to negotiate reduced charges by providing testimony against the bank president, which the federal prosecutor accepted with the particular pragmatism of someone who wanted the bigger case. Slocum was ruined regardless. His property mortgaged beyond recovery, his reputation gone, his standing in the county reduced to the kind that men avoid making eye contact with in the street. He left Delaney County before winter. The bank president's correspondence confirmed what the ledger had suggested. The Harper Ridge foreclosure had been manufactured, the debt terms manipulated, the pressure coordinated with Crane's network from the beginning. The federal court vacated the foreclosure proceedings entirely. The mortgage debt was renegotiated through a different institution at terms that were honest and manageable. The water easement ruling that Haskell had tainted was overturned, and Harper Ridge's rights to the Eastern Channel were restored and formally documented with the kind of legal standing that would not be easy to challenge. Cal and Marcus rebuilt the east fence in 4 days. Remy helped, and while he was not naturally gifted at fence building, he was enthusiastic about it in a way that the other men found more charming than obstructive mostly. The 12 head of cattle that had been driven off were recovered. Briggs's deputies had found them held in a corral on property connected to Crane's network and returned them with the straightforward efficiency of men who considered this the satisfying kind of paperwork. The kitchen remained Elena's. She never moved her bag back to within arm's reach. It sat in the corner of the back room where she slept, and it stayed there. And one morning, Wade noticed that the locked box was no longer in it, was in fact on the shelf above the work table in the kitchen, unlocked, holding recipe notes and supply lists, and the folded copy of the cattle registry she'd started maintaining because someone needed to, and she had the clearest head for numbers on the ranch. He didn't say anything about it. Some things are better honored by leaving them alone. Remy learned to make cornbread under Elena's instruction, and it was not good at first, and then it was acceptable, and then one morning it was genuinely good, and he stood at the stove and looked at it with the expression of a person who has just discovered a capability they didn't know they had. Elena told him he had reasonable instincts and should develop them, which was the warmest thing she said to anyone who wasn't Wade, and Remy treated it accordingly as high praise delivered by someone who did not give it lightly. Marcus, who had seen a great deal in his life and had developed the capacity to appreciate things without requiring them to be explained, told Cal one evening while they were finishing the last section of East Fence that the ranch felt different than it had in the years he'd been there. Cal said, "Better." Marcus thought about it. "Whole," he said. "It feels whole." On a Thursday morning in late October, Wade stood on the porch in the cold and watched his land. The pastures, the cattle in the east field, the barn that his father had built, and that was still standing. The smoke coming from the kitchen chimney, and felt the full weight of it without flinching from it. The debt and the loss and the years of carrying it alone. The 2 good men he'd buried. The hands who had stayed when they didn't have to. What the ranch had almost become and what it still was. The kitchen door opened behind him. He heard her step on the porch boards. He knew her step now, the particular cadence of it, as well as he knew the sounds of the ranch itself, and she came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything. She handed him a cup of coffee and stood with her shoulder close to his, and looked at the same thing he was looking at Harper Ridge in the morning, the land that had nearly been taken, and wasn't the life that had nearly been emptied out, and wasn't. "You're thinking about your father," she said. "Yes." What would he think? He considered the question seriously because she'd asked it seriously. "I think he'd say the land's in good hands," he said, "and that the kitchen is finally being run correctly." She turned and looked at him with that clear, steady gaze, the one that had been carefully guarded when she arrived, and was nothing but open now. "He'd be right on both counts," she said. He put his arm around her and she let him, and they stood together in the cold morning on the porch of Harper Ridge, and the ranch spread out before them, living and whole, and Wade Harper, who had spent 2 years running on stubbornness, and the conviction that he could carry the whole of it alone, understood at last what his father had known all along, that what you build is only as strong as who you build it with, and that the bravest thing a person can do is trust someone enough to let them carry half. Harper Ridge did not just survive. It became, for the first time in years, exactly what it was always meant to be: a home with real meals on the table and real people around it, and 2 people at the center of it who had both been running from something and had finally together found the one place neither of them needed to run from anymore. That was enough. That was everything. And it was going to last.